So of course the most important thing when you're building a shed is to have a solid level base to build up from, and in trying to build a cost-effective, attractive shed base that overcomes the challenge of the sloping ground is actually quite tricky. So maybe this video is useful to you, gives you some ideas. I had a few options in front of me. I could either dig from the low ground here across, but then I would have a lot of soil to get rid of and the shed base would be below ground level, so I immediately discounted that option. The next thing to do is to try and raise the ground level at the lowest point up, so it's level with the highest point, and that poses more of a challenge. Now, I did consider a concrete pad, but that's not the most cost effective, it's not the most attractive, and it's also quite a permanent option if you decide to change the end of the garden use in the future. And also it's not free draining. Water can pool underneath your timber bearers, even if they're treated. It's not ideal. I wanted something a bit more free draining. So how to combine all of those factors? Well, at first I did wonder if I could put some wooden shuttering around the outside and put in some hardcore or some gravel. That would be a good, free draining, attractive solid base for the shed to sit on. But over time, eventually the timber shuttering would rot and would fall away, and then whatever's supporting the shed might spill out, and then the shed could collapse prematurely. So again, that's not ideal. Well, fortunately, next door are giving away some paving slabs, and one of my original options was, could I just lay the shed on some paving slabs stacked up one on top of the other, but again, not the most attractive. So what I've actually decided to do is use those paving slabs and I will sink them into the ground end on. So the ground level here is about 6 inches lower than it is behind me. So I'll make sure that there's 150mm of those paving slabs sticking out from the ground, level out the soil first within that perimeter, then top it up using hardcore, whatever that depth may be, perhaps 75mm, compact that down, and that will then create an attractive, semi-permanent, non-rotting shuttering to be able to hold that hardcore in, and then I'll start building my shed on top of that.
So that's the shed base marked out and square. It's so important to get this part right because the base affects everything that you do later on. The way that I've done this is using this peg as the reference point because I needed to keep it off the boundary fence at the rear and this side fence. I've kept it away a certain distance just to enable access at a later date once the shed is built. I then measured 3.6 metres along to this peg and keeping it the same distance off the fence at the side, drove that peg in, then eyeballing approximately 90 degrees, I measured out 2.4 metres to this peg. My shed is going to be 3.6 by 2.4, and that is because I'm building it to available materials. That's 3 sheets of OSB board laid side by side. That's the easiest and cheapest way for me to do it. Using those measurements, I then Googled an online triangle calculator, and that gave me then the hypotenuse from this peg to this peg, which in this case was 4.33 metres. So with those pegs driven in, with those measurements, that ensured I had a square base, and I just applied the same principle to this half of the rectangle, to this triangle as well. You can also use something called the 3-4-5 method, which is once you've driven 3 pegs into the ground, and if you have a string line in, you can then measure 3 feet, let's say, along one string line, 4 feet along the other string line, and then the distance between the two should be exactly 5 feet, and that will tell you if you've got it square. So looking at the ground levels then, I pulled the string line taut and just used a spirit level to work those out. What I've ended up with at this low end is about 18 centimetres or 180mm, 7 inches, which reinforces the notion of using a retaining wall. So my next job will then be digging around this perimeter a trench to be able to sink the flagstones in. They're 600 by 600 flagstones. I'll angle them in at about 5 degrees, and then I'll fill that gap with hardcore once I've levelled out this soil, compact it down, and that will then give me the perfect even surface to begin building the shed base from.
So I managed about 10 feet with my 299 edging iron. So I remember somebody once saying to me, you can have it cheap, quick or good, but you can only choose two. So in this case I'm going for cheap and I'm going for good, but that means it ain't going to be quick and it's going to translate into hard work, but it saves me the cost of a skip and it's a bloody good workout.
So I've just been digging and come across this piece of bone, a rather large chunk of bone. Now, considering the proximity to the graveyard here, I'm sure it isn't though, I'm sure it isn't. So this is the trench all dug out now. At the farthest end, where the ground level was a bit higher, I've tried to go down to about 500 mil. And very simply all I've done is just put one flagstone at either end, very roughly, placed a piece of timber across, and by some sheer miracle we are not far off level. I'm more or less where I need to be with these two reference flagstones. I then have to re-peg out again, which I've done using 2 pegs at either corner, and that enables you to draw the peg line square over the trench. What I've done is I've measured 2.4 metres obviously for the 2 sides, the 2 shorter sides, and then 3.6 metres for the 2 longer sides, and then importantly I've measured 4.3 metres on the diagonal corner to corner, just to ensure that everything is nice and square. So the next thing that I'll do then is I'll just mix a lean dry mix, 1 part cement to 8 parts sharp sand, put it about 1 inch deep in this trench at this end, start to bed the first couple of flagstones in, and then we'll go from there. That's the first 2 flagstones in. I'm pleased to say that they're nicely in line with the string line, sorry, not the flag line, the string line, and square into the corner. They're level across the top, and now that I've placed this piece of timber corner to corner between the 2 reference flags, I'm pleased to say that we're perfectly level. So that's 6 flagstones in, 4 at this nearest side and 2 over at the farthest side. Checking levels as I go. Nice and level that way. And nice and level that way as well, hopefully you can see. So only 14 more to go. Right then, last one. Will it fit? That is the paving slabs all in place. Everything's nice and level. So we've got near as damn it level across the middle. We measure from side to side. We've got exactly 2.4. You'll have to take my word for it that across the centre we've got exactly 3.6. Corner to corner 4.33. The height off the ground here, if you like, the step up, that's about 15 centimetres, 150 mil. I was able to drop that down a little bit than the 180 mil than I was first expecting. It's important to me to make sure that the entire shed base is above ground, and I couldn't drop it any lower than that because this is my limiting factor. So the top of these flagstones here are just above ground level at the back there, so to save me having to dig out even more soil, that was as close as I could get it. So I'll just have to accept there'll be a bit of a step up into the shed, but that doesn't worry me. It's more important that the shed is above ground. These flagstones are heavy. They're about 50 or 60 kilos each. And something else that I didn't mention earlier that I think is quite relevant is by using entire flagstones and sinking them deep. For example, where we've got the bamboo here, it sends out runners under the ground, so these flagstones will block it, undermining the shed base too much. When it comes to doing any work on this side fence or digging out the ivy in the rear boundary fence, it means that everything to do with the shed is kind of encapsulated within this solid walls. I'm going to make some dubious concrete, so I've got 2 tons of MOT, limestone subbase, which is not the ideal material to make concrete from. But if I mix some cement with that, sort of like 1 to 4 or 1 to 6, and then put it along the outside, around these outside gaps, that will then keep the walls from splaying outwards when I put the hardcore in the middle and start to compact it. So it's most important that they are held in place. Crispy fried eggs and ham on toast, right next to my mortar samples. Breakfast of champions right there. So, after that outstanding culinary experience, after which I'm far too full and far too hot to be doing this kind of work, but I have set up the cement mixer and I've plugged it in, and this is genuinely the first time that I've started it, so let's see. Happy days. Well, that's good news. It's been in the garage for about a month. I bought it, I built it, and then it sat in there completely unused for about 4 or 5 weeks because I've not had a good reason to use it yet. It's a 219 quid screw fix job. You buy it in a box, you bring it home, you take it out, you follow the instructions, you build it with a 17 and 19mm spanner, and this is what you end up with. And ideally you test it before the returns period has expired. Right, I'm going to get on with talking about making my dubious concrete. Standard concrete mix is 4-2-1. So 4 parts aggregate, 2 parts sharp sand, 1 part cement, just done by volume. You should use ballast, but I'm not using it because I don't have it and it's more expensive, and this is about cost effectiveness. And it wouldn't be dubious concrete if I was using the right materials. MOT type 1 hardcore, not the ideal material to make concrete because not the only reason, but one of the main reasons, is you get big chunks of aggregate, sort of 70-80mm big, and even if you get these in a cement mixer coated with cement, you know, they're not going to lock together. You need the fines, you need the sand to create the substance, the body, the volume in which this aggregate is locked in place. So I'm going to add a little bit of sharp sand that I've got. Found this bag kicking around from the last house I renovated. It's possibly a couple of years old now. With moss growing in it, but that will go in. Dubious concrete after all. Now, just to confuse things, I used 2 buckets of the hardcore mix. I used half a bucket of sharp sand and about half a bucket of cement. You need the full volume of sand if you are just using loose aggregate, but because there's already dust and fines in with this aggregate, in with this hardcore, I didn't use as much sand. The amount of water that I added was just enough. You don't want to add too much water to your concrete mix because otherwise that weakens it, but I want to make sure this gets down into the gap. I'm not going to use a huge amount of it because I don't want to use up too much of my hardcore, because I've got about 1700 kilograms of hardcore across these two dumpy bags here, which is just about enough to fill the middle. So I don't want to use more dubious concrete than I have to around the outside, to hold the paving slabs in. So let's continue. That is the first load of concrete down there. I've probably built it up about sort of, I don't know, 3 or 4 inches up the side of the paving slabs. Sorry, I think the sun is making filming a bit difficult, but you get the idea. I'm going to go and do this all around the perimeter. Probably take about 4 or 5 mixes. So that was a long day. The concreting is all done, and I've also put the soil in to the middle and filled it back in all around the edges, back up to ground level. In typical British fashion, the weather started off with blinding sunshine and is now absolutely pelting it down with rain. Some nice, refreshing summer rain, because it's been boiling today. And actually that's a good thing, because having covered over the concrete with this soil, that won't affect the chemical set of the concrete, so that's fine. And then this rain will help the soil that I've put back in to settle down before I put the hardcore in. There's probably a little bit more to top up with hardcore than I would like. I'd maybe like to shave an inch off that or so, said nobody ever. But hopefully I've got enough, and that will fill the gaps. So once the concrete's properly gone off, the pavers are rock solid in place, being held in by the soil around the outside as well. Tomorrow I'll get on with putting the hardcore in, and that will be the base done. I'm going to give this a pass over with the hardcore dry, even though it will be a bit dusty, just to level things out a little bit, check that I've got enough in here, and then I will go over it again, having added or taken away a little bit, go over it with the watering can, and that will help the grains lock together, so do a few more passes with that. Okay, so that's a few passes. I'm trying to wiggle it around just to try and massage the stones a bit more towards the edge, where it's possibly a bit high in the middle compared to the edges. Yeah, it's dusty, but I don't want them to lock together too much at this stage until I'm ready for my kind of final compaction when I wet it down. Heavy work. It's a bit like an unruly dog that won't do as it's told. Hopefully you can see that there's a bit of a hump, so I'll need to rake that outwards a little bit, give it another pass still while it's dry, and then start to bring the levels up to its final level, add a bit of water before I compact it. So that's a couple of dry passes done over the entire base. I've more or less got the high point in the middle levelled out and pushed towards the sides. So that is the final pass done. You can see where I've put a bit of this sand blinding down, and laying this piece of timber across. There are no gaps underneath, and we are bang on level. So that's the shed base built. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Please do like, subscribe, chuck any comments down below. I will catch you in part 2 when I start to build the shed. In the meantime, I've got about 20 minutes to get this compactor back to the highest.